you know, the secondary sex characteristics in women, you know, basically formation of breasts and perhaps, you know, different things with the pelvic area and so on. With men, you get some of those similar sex characteristics as they age because of the significance of estrogen being increased over time. That can be changed. That can be reversed. So there's an example of reversal of what we have become more and more accustomed with as one of the manifestations of aging. Okay? And this is done through something I do every day and I've done for years and years, hormone balancing. By changing the hormonal balance in a man, yes, men have hormones too, we can reverse some of these characteristics and really help to bring youth back. Now, am I suggesting that men go out and get testosterone treatments? No, I'm not. Although it is a possibility, there are issues associated with that can cause some problems. You know, basically it creates a dependence on that particular, I can call it a drug, it's really a hormone, but it is an anabolic steroid as well. So there are issues associated with the feedback loop that's involved in your body's control of hormone levels. And as we add in hormones, then guess what? Our body responds by lessening the stimulation of the development of those hormones. So what we can be doing is actually training our bodies to produce less of what we're desiring. So if you ever get off of it, well, guess what? It goes right down. And it may be further down than when you first sought treatment. So there are other ways we can do stimulation of those processes through herbal medicine and other types of situations, like alterations in the diet can make a difference in your hormones, quite a bit actually. Avoidance of certain foods can help to reduce those levels or change those levels in a desirable way. And there are certain foods that we can select, like green tea is a great example. Green tea as an extract is a great way to fight the conversion or to inhibit the conversion from testosterone to estrogen. And there are other underlying hormones that are involved too. I would be getting kind of technical on that, but androstenedione is one of them. You could look that up if you want to look into this more. And the conversion from progesterone, and then conversion over to other forms, various estrogen forms, and so on. And 17-OHP is a 17 branch of hydroxyprogesterone that can lead to issues. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to get too specific, but that's something that can be researched very easily. Just Google those terms I just threw out. But the conversion from testosterone to estrogen is one of those aging characteristics in men. And in women, unfortunately, that same conversion can be an issue that takes estrogen receptor positive cancers, such as breast cancers that are estrogen receptor positive, more forward. In other words, assists the development of the cancer. So there's another application where an aromatase enzyme inhibitor, which is an enzyme, aromatase is an enzyme that helps with the conversion of testosterone to estrogen in your body and the other things I just mentioned, and can exacerbate the situation with development of breast cancer. So there are drugs that are prescribed for those cases, and I think in the cases of breast cancer especially, I think that might be more appropriate in some cases, at least. I have treated those kinds of things with more natural approaches. And certainly green tea extract is one of the tools in my tool chest as an aromatase enzyme inhibitor. So that's one area, is the hormonal area, right? Which I talk about all the time because it happens to be a strength of mine. However, there are many, many other kinds of aging processes that are going on in the body. And so what we can do is talk about many of those kinds, such as, we have the physiological changes that are occurring that partly happen due to the accumulation of what we could call debris. Accumulation of debris in our cells. Basically, the garbage that accumulates inside each cell that may not be removed appropriately through life can accumulate. And this can exacerbate issues with the functionality of each cell. So a good cleansing, a good detox can be a very useful tool in helping fight against the aging process. That's another one. We'll talk about telomeres. We'll talk about more issues related to the aging process, DNA and tightness of DNA, and there's all of these kinds of issues that are related. But let's take a little break, and then we'll get more into depth on these subjects. So you're listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF Digital Broadcasting, and hopefully you will gather some insight into the aging process on this show, and we'll be talking about some approaches we take with aging and fighting the aging process after break. I'd like to go ahead and discuss some of the aspects and approaches. So the conventional approach to treatment of disorders associated with aging tends to focus on treatment of symptoms. We discussed that. And rather than correction of underlying causal factors, which is what we focus on at A Path to Wellness. So the issues of physiological and cognitive decline are certainly important in aging as well, right? It's not just about wrinkles. So Alzheimer's disease is an example. There are dementias from other sources, but certainly that's of prime importance in the elderly, and an important area to be able to assist on improvement. And certainly we do that at A Path to Wellness quite a bit. So as of 2010, the number of individuals afflicted with dementia was in excess of 24 million in the US. And that's expected to double from 2010. So by 2030, there will be twice that many, or around 50 million individuals expected to exhibit the disorder of dementia. However, dementia, as I mentioned, doesn't necessarily indicate that an individual has Alzheimer's, since vascular dementia is generally considered the second leading cause. So there may be vascular issues that lead to issues with the functionality of the brain. So there's also what's considered a combination of the two. Sometimes you have Alzheimer's and then you have other forms of dementia involved as well. So you may have vascular combined with Alzheimer's. So they're not exclusive, they're not mutually exclusive. And that's sometimes known as mixed dementia. And that may actually be the most common form at 53% of the cases of dementia, this combination. So by addressing the underlying causes, natural preventative solutions to treatment of the disorders associated with aging in general, and certainly cognitive issues, could go a long way toward the reduction of both the personal and the public cost of that. Now we can talk about monetary costs, we can talk about costs to health, costs to families. There are many ways to lose somebody in your family. Alzheimer's is really a horrible way, in dementia, because they're still there, and they don't necessarily recognize the people that are visiting them in the room. They don't. And I can relate to that. I've had some family members go through this, and it was kind of rough. At times, like my grandfather at times would recognize me, and at times wouldn't, and even my grandmother, who was still around at the time as well, he wouldn't always necessarily recognize. And that was really difficult for her, obviously. So this part of that creates a loss. It creates feelings of grief and these kinds of things, just like losing somebody through a car accident would. But they're still there. So you want to reach out to them. You want to try to get them to understand you and recognize you. It's just a natural thing. But quite often they won't. So if we can fight against these kinds of things by looking at the underlying causal factors and really delving into that issue, this will help a lot of people. A lot of families, maybe help some not have to go through this. So we're going to explore these underlying causal factors and potential natural treatments for the disorders, not only associated with dementia, as I've just been talking about, but all the other things I was mentioning earlier. the whole syndrome of aging. You know, I believe we're on a path right now in terms of the discoveries that are being made and the understanding of the underlying causal factors that is developing for aging. And there is a possibility that at some point, not too far in the distant future, we'll be able to not only stop the aging process, okay, as it's known, but reverse it. And this may sound like a wackadoo idea, but there's science behind it, I guarantee you. There's a lot of science behind it. So we certainly are at a point where there are many substances in the natural world, at least, that can help to stop one area, and that is that of telomeres, stop the shrinking that occurs in telomeres. And I've talked about telomeres before on previous shows, but I haven't talked primarily about anti-aging, I don't believe. So that's another area that we can delve into in terms of underlying causes of aging and the aging process. All right, so understanding the cause or causes of both brain and body aging is a very important area to understand anti-aging and to really be able to have an anti-aging effect on an individual or groups of individuals. So a range of hypotheses on the underlying causes of both dementia and Alzheimer's, we'll start with that, may be processed if we want to look at it from the point of view of a nutritional approach, right? A combination of genetic, environmental, vascular, such as hypertension, cerebrovascular disease, heart disease, stroke, or diabetes even, and inflammatory disorders, and psychosocial factors can be involved. When I talk about psychosocial factors, I'm talking about, like, if somebody is isolated, they kind of start to, it's possible for them to start to lose some of those social skills, maybe not, not to be focused on individual encounters, not having the ability over time to communicate as well. And this can affect health. We're social beings. And if we're isolated from that social environment, some changes occur. So this is important as well, the psychosocial aspect of it. The chances of late life dementia, Alzheimer's, and declining cognitive function in general increase based on, or as, what they're correlated to certain factors, okay? So based on the level of cholesterol, believe it or not. So declining cognitive function increases as total cholesterol declines after midlife. Isn't that interesting? All this emphasis we're having on reducing cholesterol in our population, with the idea of that being to prevent heart disease, right? So let's look at that aspect for a bit. Okay, so heart disease and the onset of heart disease is certainly another aging factor, right? And the emphasis in, at least in the US and much of Western society, is to focus on reducing cholesterol. So as we reduce cholesterol, we're taking away the source material for the creation of our hormones, because our hormones are made from cholesterol. So yes, it is an indication of a higher likelihood of heart disease, heart attacks, these kinds of things, if very elevated. but it is also the same, virtually the same risk of those same issues if extremely low. So what we need to do is find not, if it's too high what it is or if it's too low what, but where is the optimal range? That's what we need to be finding out. Where's the optimal range of cholesterol? That's what we want. And there are test ranges that are indicated on lab tests and these kinds of things. And I believe that we need to stay in an optimal range because, as I said, that's the source of the creation of our hormones. So what we need to do is maybe also emphasize more of the quote unquote good cholesterol, even in the circumstance where there's elevated bad cholesterol. Okay, I'll just call them that. There's no bad, there's no good in reality. But they're both involved in our normal processes. And LDL creation, which is low density lipoprotein, is called the bad cholesterol, but it's really the body being involved in repair processes having to do with vascular damage. Back to the vascular issues with dementia, right? You see the correlation? So we have different kinds of things going on with regard to the use of cholesterol in our bodies. So to focus on reducing it, and in some cases, some of the standards being used, I think are way too low. Like to bring somebody down below 100, it seems to be becoming a standard for the application of cholesterol reduction. But then you're providing less of that source material for creation of your hormones, including vitamin D, which is basically a hormone-like substance, if not a hormone itself, because the cholesterol in our skin is what allows us to convert to the creation of vitamin D within our bodies. And that also affects hormones. So we have a lot of this relationship with hormones involved in the action of cholesterol in our bodies. And there is also a correlation, as I just mentioned, an inverse correlation, actually, with total cholesterol. So as total cholesterol declines after midlife, what's known as midlife now, anyway, 40s, 50s, there's declining cognitive function, or there tends to be declining cognitive function as well. All right. Yet elevated cholesterol going into midlife also increases the likelihood of cognitive decline. So if you're too high, you're more likely to have a heart attack, and you're more likely to have cognitive decline. Yet if you're also too low, you're more likely to have heart attack, and you're more likely to have cognitive decline. You see? So we need to find that mid-range, that optimal range, to help ourselves in terms of preventing heart attacks and cardiovascular disease and preventing the onset of dementia. And I haven't heard anyone else talking about this, honestly. So you may be hearing this the first time. But I think it's a very important point. We don't just want to drive that cholesterol down. We need to find the optimal range. All right, and this to me is an important aspect of anti-aging as well. So in the elderly, many other issues can occur and be contributing to the aging syndrome. And malnutrition is certainly one of those. In fact, how many nursing homes, I don't know if you've been in nursing homes, any of you, but nursing homes quite often serve really poor food, in my experience. Now, there are some nursing homes that do a very good job and have, fresh cooked meals and these kinds of things. But many of them are doing the same processed food stuff, using that to feed the population, just like we do in our school systems to a certain extent. And these foods are not very nutritious, and many of the aspects of the nutrition are not there, such as food enzymes. The enzymes may be depleted. There are many aspects to it. I talk about these issues all the time on the show, so I'm not going to get into that too much. But malnutrition can be an aspect, and weight loss may manifest as a loss of muscle mass as well, which is known as sarcopenia, correlated with dementia. So these things, malnutrition and weight loss, both are correlated with dementia. Yet there are debates about which comes first, sarcopenia or dementia. And there is some lack of clarity on that. So I can't say that it's definitely the nutrition or definitely the weight loss and sarcopenia that are, first, or which comes first, the chicken or the egg, this kind of thing. So it's possible that the inability to recognize, taste, or prepare food, or even remember how to eat, there's a thought, may result in malnutrition or eventually sarcopenia. So elderly nutrition and diet may lead to deficiencies that are also correlated with many disorders. So I've talked about sarcopenia. Well, what about Parkinson's? What about the inability to swallow? This is common. This is known as dysphagia. And then, of course, what we were already discussing, which is dementia and Alzheimer's. So at least one of the mechanisms of damage for dementia and other forms of cognitive impairment, as well as neurological disorders, is oxidative damage. And we hear about this a lot. So free radical damage, right? You hear about antioxidants and oxidants or oxidation. And this is akin to, a rusty nail or rust on metal, akin to an apple that you leave out and how it turns brown. But if you add some vitamin C first, then it tends to turn brown much later in the process. It lasts much longer. And this is true for also things like, I recently learned that we're now looking at using shellfish-derived substances, chitosan, I believe it's called, or something like that is going on the surface of bananas, or likely to preserve the bananas. So we're going to have probably shellfish warnings when people are consuming bananas to help them last longer. So many people have an allergy to shellfish. So, but anyway, off this topic. So the main thing is oxidation here can contribute to aging as a major component of the aging process. And because of the free radical damage from exposure to things in our environment, toxins in our environment, nutritional deficiencies, resulting in a lack of antioxidants like vitamins A, C, E, and mineral selenium are very important antioxidants in this. We can lead to an accelerated aging process. Okay. So another one that can be important in the aging process, and even back in the 70s and 80s, Dirk Pearson and others were involved in anti-aging through calorie restriction. And I think one aspect of calorie restriction is to keep the blood sugar levels more even. And when we don't overeat, we're getting less surge in our blood sugar. And so what does this have to do with it? Well, insulin is a very aging hormone. And insulin is the body's response produced by the pancreas to a surge in sugar. So a surge in sugar is responded to with a surge in insulin quite often. And then that affects the oxygen transfer from the bloodstream into the muscles, damaging the muscles to a certain extent and making them less youthful, we'll say. Okay, so this adds to or contributes to aging. So by not having those insulin surges, we can help ourselves avoid some of the damage that we associate with aging. And this is true for people with and without diabetes. Okay. Diabetes comes into play because insulin is a major factor in that. And there are other hormones involved in that process as well. And I've spoken about diabetes, so I'll refer you to that. But, this is another factor. So if you're consuming lots of sweets, lots of starches, lots of sugar, then you may be contributing to your own aging process. In other words, you may be accelerating your own aging. So it's time to look at those things. Look at what you're eating. Look at starches in your diet. Look at the sweets. Look at the desserts. Maybe you need to cut them down or cut them off, depending on your situation. And of course, we're not trying to prevent, cure, or treat disease on this show. But what we're trying to do is provide information for you to reflect on and help everyone understand the process and how they might improve things. And then, of course, there's always a trip to a path to wellness to get some professional help on that situation to maybe help you have a more quality lifestyle. Okay, so, and possibly help you with feeling better long term and feeling more alive and alert and aware and maybe experiencing fewer of the aging signs and symptoms that you would otherwise if you continued on the path you may be on. That's why we call our practice a path to wellness. So back to the aspects of oxidation, we have the free radicals that result from exposure to all these different toxins, and partly due to the normal metabolic processes that are occurring in our bodies related to activity of the little energy factories we have in all our cells known as mitochondria, and the cellular respiration that occurs there. And oxygen is certainly a very important part of all this. Free radical damage to membrane lipids, so we have the cell membranes themselves can be damaged, as well as some of the things going on inside the cells to a certain extent. So antioxidants are a very important part of addressing and stemming the aging process to a certain extent. And this has been known for decades. We've been in the practice of using antioxidants to help this situation, to help fend off the activity of free radicals. So you see, we've already covered many different areas where there is help for stemming and improving the process of aging in terms of how we might feel, our quality of life, our alertness, our cognitive function, internal processes that are going on externally, how things might be, the whole creation of wrinkles and that kind of thing. A lot of that has to do with free radicals as well, damage from ultraviolet radiation from the sun that bombards our skin and does damage to our skin, but also that contribution of cholesterol and its importance in all of this. And then we have collagen. So if you're not getting enough of the antioxidant vitamin C or vitamin A, these both can affect your skin quite a bit, or vitamin E as well. So very important to that are antioxidants. All right. So additionally, the process of methylation. This is where we get a methyl donor in the process of combining some things, taking part in the creation of neurotransmitters, for example, and the effects on the neurons and the thought processes that result from that derivation of methionine from homocysteine. Okay, this is all getting kind of technical, but this is involved as well, and the production of cell membranes. In fact, a direct correlation between homocysteine levels and cognitive dysfunction has been studied and confirmed. So there is a direct correlation between homocysteine levels, and you can have your homocysteine checked to see where that is, and cognitive dysfunction. Now, this is not just for those who have the MTHFR gene, which is just a long word, we'll just say. MTHFR relates to homocysteine levels and where one might be in terms of the effects of that on cardiovascular health, and also in this case, cognitive function. So one more time, I'll just mention that there is a direct correlation between homocysteine levels and cognitive dysfunction. Also, inflammatory processes that may be involved there with homocysteine being elevated. Homocysteine is akin to looking at cholesterol. You know, they're similar in the sense that they're both indicators of cardiovascular issues potentially, and certainly of inflammation. So cardiovascular function is also negatively affected by elevated homocysteine levels, and that may cause also inflammatory processes that lead to pathology when the homocysteine is elevated. So aging in general
sucks.
Is, my producer says it sucks. So aging is also established partly by the lengths of telomeres, which I briefly mentioned earlier. I've mentioned on other shows. Telomeres are another aspect of aging. They're kind of touted to be the thing with aging, but they're an aspect of aging, and they are an important one. Telomeres are the base material at the end of the DNA or chromosomes that is involved in cellular replication. So telomere length shortens over time with each cycle of replication, reducing mitochondrial activity, those little energy factories inside the cells, with each cycle. So until the material is gone and the cell death or apoptosis occurs. So that as the telomere shrinks, we're essentially, that's a factor, a very important factor in aging. We're aging as the telomere length shrinks. And then eventually the cell dies. So as cells start to accumulate like that die off in our body and in our organs, then we start to see organ function issues. And this is also part of what we consider aging. Well, does that sound like something that has to be? No, it's not something that has to be. You know, aging is a syndrome. It's basically, by most conventional thought probably at this point, is not considered a disease yet because it's accepted. It's just accepted as something that's normal, you know, which a lot of things are accepted as just normal. But that doesn't mean it has to be that way. And it's certainly not optimal to age, right? I mean, yes, you need to age in terms of going from an infant to a child to an adult, through adolescence and all that, period. We won't get into that. But then as you become an adult, you're an adult. There are societies that have individuals who are in their 60s who are better at running, more athletic than the younger folk. Did you know that? On the face of the earth, there are these societies, some of the more aboriginal societies. The elderly are more athletic, are more physically capable. Yet in modern society, we don't see that typically. There are guys like Jack LaLanne who passed away not too long ago. But for the most part, we don't see that. And that's partly because of this horrible, food that we have that's so devoid of nutrition that we then add all these chemicals, additives, preservatives, etc., to really ruin this food and take away some of the quality of the food. Now, I am talking specifically more in the Western society, but as especially the influence of American food, fast food, in other words, spreads throughout the world, the many societies are being affected by this. So we're seeing these same things happening with societies where long age has been the norm, like Okinawa, Japan, living into the 100-year range is not unusual in Okinawa. But it's becoming less so because of the influence of fast food and other things, okay? And, modern society and all of the environmental toxins we add and all of these other things that we're doing to ourselves to, add to and accelerate the process of aging. And that does bring up also oxygen. Oxygen is very important to us, obviously. I did say that a little earlier, but it alkalinizes our bodies, right? And so what does that do? Well, that brings down inflammation. It helps to. And that is also a part of aging that we can help to reduce. So natural approaches to halt or reverse this activity can be included as part of an anti-aging protocol. All right. So in the next few weeks, I'll be going over these issues. And if you want to see some of this that I'm discussing in written form, you can take a look at Tampa Bay Wellness Magazine, because I'll be doing another series of articles. I've already started to work on it as a project. And this series of articles will focus on this, what I call the syndrome of aging. It's basically a disease. I see it as. Aging is a disease. When we talk about growth, that's a different situation. When I'm talking about, I'm not talking about aging as in going from a baby to an adult. I'm talking about aging as in the degradation that occurs in our physical beings. That doesn't need to happen. There are many things at the root of these that are part of this process that we can do something about. All right. And there are many, back to telomeres for a second, there are many substances that can be helpful with both fending off that shrinkage in telomeres as well as repairing it once that shrinkage is done, lengthening telomeres. That's very interesting. There are many substances that can be involved there that can help with that. So, all right, so we talked about I'll get to the underlying causes a little more. So we talked about telomeres, we've talked about the cellular debris, we've talked about environmental toxins and the effects of insulin and not eating a good balanced diet and allowing yourself to eat sweets and these kinds of things, and reducing oxygen transfer from your bloodstream to your muscles to deplete your muscle function. All of these kinds of things contribute to aging. The free radical damage done by all the environmental toxins. The normal processes, metabolic processes, need to happen. There's some oxidation occurring because of normal metabolism. And there's a normal process of repairing the oxidation damage in the body because of that. However, when we're bombarded by environmental toxins and all of the day-to-day things that we're experiencing, and the stress on our bodies, the stress of an active modern lifestyle, all of these things do damage to our bodies and cause us to age more rapidly. Stress is a huge factor. I'll give you an example. I had a mother and her daughter come to me. The daughter is mentally disabled to a certain extent, and the mother, of course, has been caring for her all her life. Well, when I did telomere testing on the mother had telomeres equivalent, according to the testing, to that of a 75-year-old. This mother was 57 years old at the time. She had telomeres of a 75-year-old. The daughter, who was in her early 30s, had the telomeres of a 9-year-old. In other words, the aging process wasn't occurring nearly as rapidly in her body, at least based on the telomere length, because she wasn't dealing with the stress. She was having a good old time because she was, not aware of all of the stressful aspects of life, to a certain extent at least, because her mother took those on as the caregiver. And this is true for a lot of caregivers. There's a lot of stress involved in caregiving. And the caregiver quite often suffers quite a bit from all that. So that's another aspect. Stress, very important. So as we go through life and we experience all of these things, stress, environmental toxins, and so on, we are damaging our bodies. And that is really what's part of what's causing us to age. Now, there are approaches to some of these issues. And one other issue I should mention, just on a cellular level, okay, this is part of aging. When we're born, our DNA is really tight. Our DNA is in a double helix, and is very tightly formed, and leads to a very efficiently working cell structure. Okay, and the exposed DNA structure, the exposed uracil, all of these different parts of the DNA, adenosine, etc., are exposed in a coded system. We call our genealogy, right? So we have the structure of the DNA in a certain coded form, and the processes of transcription and decoding of the DNA lead to things that happen in our bodies, and there's other aspects of that as well. But as we age, all of a sudden the DNA become looser. Not all of a sudden, but as the process continues, the DNA becomes looser and looser and looser. And now, not the external coating alone is being exposed, but also what's on the inside. So now all of a sudden we can be exposed to processes in our cells that can degrade the efficiency of the cell structure and even potentially change the encoding that's involved in the DNA. And this is also an aspect of aging. So I told you I was going to get a little deep. So we have a lot of these things going on at one time. And this is why I call, when we look at the signs and symptoms of aging, I call it a syndrome. All of these processes don't need to be happening, at least not to the extent that they are. And by reducing all of these aspects to the extent that we can, we are working on reducing the aging process. And therefore, we can add to our own longevity and improve quality of life. And isn't that the most important thing? If you're 120 and you're swimming every day and you're bicycling and you're walking everywhere and you're able to have an intelligent conversation and experience life to the fullest, why not? Why not? If you can be 150, I know that seems pretty high. What if we can make it to 200 and have quality life? This is what a lot of scientists are working on right now in the anti-aging field. And there are natural approaches to improve all of these aspects that I've been discussing. And this is also part of what I'm practicing at A Path to Wellness. So, given all that, feel free to take a look at the articles in the Tampa Bay Wellness magazine. If you want to find them, they'll be tampabaywellness.com. And the first of these articles on anti-aging is not out yet. That will be in the December issue. But I've been doing a series on natural treatment of psychological disorders, which I finished the series out this month, actually, in the magazine. But I'm going to be doing this exploration of anti-aging. And if you'd like to find out more, you can certainly, if you have issues you want to address, you can give us a call at Path to Wellness at 727-329-9637. That's 727-329-9637. The website is www.aptw.net, short for A Path to Wellness. And I'm Dr. Christopher Jackson, PhD, DOM, Florida, and you've been listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com.